Operation Epic Fury has been laser-focused from the very start, as I've said to all of you.
At the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, with outbound shipping funneled into a narrow lane and the Gulf of Oman opening like a trapdoor ahead, one Iranian-flagged cargo vessel made a run that could not be ignored. The ship pushed east under blackout discipline, hugging the edge of legal transit while every radar screen in the region tracked the same ugly possibility. If it slipped through, the blockade had a hole in it. If someone fired too early, the whole waterway could ignite. On the American side of the horizon, a destroyer had contact, Marines were standing by for a boarding, and an F-15 alert cell had 7 minutes to get airborne before the sea fight below turned into an air defense emergency. The vessel was not a supertanker and it did not need to be. A medium cargo ship carrying fuel components, machine parts, and communications gear could matter just as much in a maritime crisis because blockades are broken one precedent at a time. If a single Iranian-flagged ship forced passage past U.S. enforcement, insurers would notice, traders would notice, Tehran would notice, and every captain waiting west of Hormuz would learn the same lesson. The blockade was only as real as its first successful interception. That is why this transit had been watched for hours before anyone on the bridge of the American destroyer spoke a word to the target. Satellites had followed the ship's departure from the Iranian coast. Maritime patrol aircraft updated its course. Signals teams worked to confirm whether its identification picture matched its declared cargo and destination. It moved like a commercial vessel, but it moved with too much discipline. Its radio traffic was minimal. Its route changes were slight but deliberate. It was not sailing blind into danger. It was testing the line. And the line in Hormuz is unforgiving. At its narrowest, the strait is only a little over 20 miles across, but that number flatters the water. The actual traffic lanes are far tighter, separated by a buffer that leaves massive merchant hulls threading through a corridor only a few miles wide. There is no graceful room to evade, no wide blue emptiness to disappear into. Every merchantman is exposed, every escort has to think in geometry, and every approach angle matters because one ship forced off course can choke the channel behind it. That pressure is what makes the place more than a map feature. Roughly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil trade lives or dies by this gap between Iran and Oman. LNG cargoes, tanker schedules, refinery planning, war risk insurance, naval posturing, all of it compresses into a strip of water where speedboats can hide near islands, drones can skim low over cluttered horizons, and anti-ship missiles from the coast can threaten ships that technically are nowhere near shore. A blockade there is never just a military act. It is an economic trigger with a firing pin. For Washington, allowing one Iranian-flagged vessel to transit unchallenged after publicly announcing enforcement would weaken more than prestige. It would suggest the U.S. Navy could announce control but not impose it. For Tehran, sending a ship through was not just about cargo. It was a message to buyers, regional rivals, and its own domestic audience that American pressure could be bent, embarrassed, and eventually broken. So when the cargo ship Tuska crossed into the wider waters east of the strait and kept moving after initial warnings, the confrontation stopped being procedural. It became strategic. The first challenge came over bridge-to-bridge radio, formal and calm.
Reduce speed. Prepare to be boarded. Acknowledge coalition enforcement.
The ship answered just enough to avoid sounding openly hostile, then continued on almost unchanged course. That was the first sign its captain was working under instructions bigger than seamanship. Merchant masters in a live naval cordon do not play games unless somebody above them wants a headline. The destroyer closed, but not recklessly. American commanders had no interest in driving a billion-dollar warship into a confined intercept where shore-based missiles, explosive drones, and swarming fast boats could suddenly compress the fight. The boarding would happen where sensors, helicopters, and supporting aircraft could overlap. A cruiser farther south expanded the radar picture. A patrol aircraft fed surface contacts from altitude. The carrier strike group beyond the immediate choke point remained the deeper fist behind the extended hand. Then the threat picture started to harden. Multiple small contacts lifted from the Iranian side of the Gulf like specks on a dirty scope, two dispersed for a clean declaration and two organized to dismiss. Some were likely fast attack craft, the kind that can turn civilian traffic into cover. Another track looked airborne, low and slow, possibly a drone. None had fired. None needed to. Their existence alone changed the boarding equation, because a rope descent onto a merchant deck is one thing in calm control. It is something else when every man hanging below a helicopter could become the first casualty of a regional war. This is where the 7-minute clock mattered. A quick reaction pair of F-15E Strike Eagles was already sitting armed and fueled on alert status at a U.S. base in the Gulf. The pilots did not need a long brief. The target box was loaded. Tanker support was available later if needed. Their job was immediate air cover, maritime overwatch, and if required, fast destruction of any drone or aircraft that tried to collapse the intercept. From scramble horn to wheels up, 7 minutes was the standard that separated posture from combat readiness.
The order came sharp and short. Launch the Eagles.
Ground crews were already pulling pins and clearing ladders. Engine whine rolled into afterburner thunder. In a crisis like this, the most valuable minutes are the ones nobody on YouTube ever sees. Helmet down, taxi line lit, checklists. Compressed by training, tower coordination stripped to essentials, 2 fighters accelerating past the point where hesitation still exists. 7 minutes after the call, both F-15s were airborne, climbing hard into the Gulf night with long-range missiles on the rails and the boarding force still waiting for the air picture to stabilize. People hear F-15 and imagine pure dogfight theater, but over Hormuz the aircraft mattered for a colder reason.
Speed. Sensors. Persistence.
A Strike Eagle can run fast enough to redraw a tactical map in minutes and still arrive with the radar power to sort a chaotic picture of sea clutter, low flyers, and unknown tracks. It can fight air-to-air, watch the surface, talk to ships, and carry enough fuel to stay relevant after the first burst of drama. In a narrow maritime corridor, that kind of flexibility is not luxury.
It is insurance.
As the fighters crossed the coast and pushed toward the intercept area, the destroyer issued its second warning. This time there was no ambiguity. Engines to idle. Prepare to be stopped by force. The cargo vessel still did not comply. The bridge lights remained controlled. No panic, no obvious surrender, just a deliberate refusal to do the one thing that would cool the temperature. On the destroyer's combat information center, that refusal carried its own meaning. The target was now either buying time for help to arrive or trying to force U.S. forces into the first visible act of violence. Commanders chose not to give it the clean propaganda picture. Instead of raking the hull or risking a broadside stop, they went for mobility. A precision shot targeted the engineering space, intended to disable propulsion without sinking the ship or killing the crew outright. The round struck. Seconds later, thermal signatures around the stern changed and the vessel's wake thinned into confusion. It was still moving, but the run had been broken. That should have simplified everything.
It did not.
The small contacts that had been hanging back started to close. Not in a full charge, not with open weapons, but enough to threaten the boarding corridor. Commercial traffic in the area complicated the picture even more. Tankers moving under strict lane discipline could not simply scatter out of the way. Every civilian hull became background clutter, every radar return needed sorting, and every commander on station had to decide which contact was reckless, which was hostile, and which was just trapped in the worst shipping lane on Earth at the wrong moment. The lead F-15 checked in first, high and fast, then rolled into a wide protective orbit east of the stricken vessel. The second dropped lower to build a better look angle on the surface picture. Through targeting pods and radar sweeps, the pilots began separating noise from intent. One probable drone track held low over the water, too steady to be a bird, too purposeful to ignore. 2 fast surface contacts altered course the moment the fighters arrived, proof that air presence alone can have more stopping power than a warning shot. Rules of engagement in that kind of fight are brutally narrow. Nobody wanted the first American missile fired in the sky over Hormuz unless the target was cleanly hostile. Shoot too early and the confrontation becomes an air war. Wait too long and Marines descending onto steel decks become exposed men hanging in open space. So the F-15 crews did what elite crews are trained to do. They held the line between caution and delay. The drone made the decision harder. It crossed into the intercept box at low altitude, descending toward the crippled ship from the north. If it was scouting, it was bad enough. If it was carrying explosives or trying to provide terminal targeting data to shore batteries, the entire operation could unravel in seconds. The lead Eagle locked it. Command asked for one more confirmation pass. The drone continued inbound.
Permission came.
One missile left the rail, a brief spear of light in an otherwise controlled sky. The intercept happened well away from the cargo vessel, high enough to avoid showering the deck with fragments, low enough to keep the kill inside the threat lane. On naval radios below, the report was plain: airborne contact destroyed.
No cheer. No triumph.
Just one dangerous variable removed so the boarding could finally begin. The helicopter came in from the safer quarter, staying outside predictable approach lines for as long as possible before angling toward the Tuska's deck. Marines fast roped down in dark gear, boots hitting steel above a crew that now understood the transit was over. These moments are never as clean as movies make them. Decks are slick. Railings snag equipment. The ship's own structures create blind corners and dead space. Every hatch can hide a panicked sailor or an armed escort. Every second between first boot down and bridge control feels longer than the entire flight in. The boarding team moved with the kind of violence that is measured, not wild. Secure the bridge. Separate the crew. Sweep engineering. Confirm no scuttling charges. Check manifests against reality.
The captain protested.
The crew complied in fragments. One compartment had to be forced. Another contained communications equipment far beyond what a normal cargo transit needed. Not a smoking gun on its own, but enough to confirm what the Americans suspected from the start. This was not a routine commercial voyage trapped in politics. It was a deliberate blockade challenge with state backing and contingency support. Below them, the ship was hurt but stable. The engine room hit had done its job without sending the vessel to the bottom. That mattered. In Hormuz, a sinking can be almost as dangerous as an escape. A crippled hull in the wrong lane can jam traffic, raise insurance rates overnight, and gift every player in the region a grievance to weaponize. Disable, board, tow, inspect. That was always the preferred sequence, and against the odds.
It was holding.
The fast boats never fully committed. Maybe the missile shot at the drone changed their calculus. Maybe the sight of armed fighters overhead told them the next escalation would not stay small. Maybe their mission had only been to pressure, observe, and force hesitation. Whatever the reason, they turned off in arcs rather than arrows, drifting back toward waters where attribution gets muddy and response becomes political. That withdrawal said as much as any firefight could have. Tehran had tested the perimeter and found it guarded. Yet the most dangerous minutes were still not over. Boarding a vessel is one problem. Extracting it from a crisis zone is another. Tug support had to be coordinated. Nearby merchant traffic had to be deconflicted. Air cover remained overhead in case a second drone, a helicopter, or even a shore-launched missile tried to exploit the slow phase after contact. Everyone on comms knew that many operations go wrong not during the dramatic breach, but in the administrative-looking half-hour after it, when relief starts whispering that the hard part is finished. It was not finished until the seized ship was under escort and moving away from the pressure point. Only then did the wider meaning settle in. The U.S. had not simply stopped one freighter. It had demonstrated that the blockade could be enforced beyond a press statement, beyond legal argument, beyond social media footage.
Detection worked.
Standoff interdiction worked. Precision disablement worked. The boarding team got on deck. Air cover launched on time. The 7-minute F-15 response was not a dramatic side note. It was the hinge that kept a maritime interception from turning into a mass casualty ambush. For Iran, the message was equally sharp. Small boat pressure, ambiguous drone coverage, and commercial masking can complicate an intercept, but they do not guarantee passage when the other side is willing to fuse naval firepower, aviation, and real-time intelligence into one chain. The vessel had not slipped through. It had been stopped, stripped of initiative, and turned into evidence. In the language of crises, that is a costly failure. For every navy and shipping firm watching, the lesson was even bigger. Modern blockades are not lines of battleships parked across a map. They are networks, satellites queuing ships, ships queuing aircraft, aircraft protecting helicopters, legal warnings backed by selective force, and every action calibrated to stay 1 inch below uncontrolled war. The side that wins those encounters is not always the one with the bigger fleet. It is the one that can tighten time, tighten information, and tighten force without breaking command discipline. That mattered in boardrooms as much as in combat centers. Oil traders were already pricing risk by rumor. Underwriters were measuring every transit against the chance that one misread radar return could close the corridor again. Regional capitals were watching to see whether the United States could enforce a blockade without freezing commercial traffic outright. A failed intercept would have encouraged more runners, more escorts, more brinkmanship. A successful one imposed a harsher reality. Any ship trying to turn legal ambiguity into operational freedom now had to assume it would be found, fixed, and stopped. That discipline is why the intercept mattered. No wild broadside. No cinematic inferno. No panic firing into a crowded sea lane. The Americans disabled the ship instead of sinking it. They killed the drone instead of blasting every unknown contact nearby. They boarded once the air picture was good enough, then held the area long enough to survive the vulnerable aftermath. It was sharp, limited, and brutal in exactly the way serious military professionals prefer when the alternative is a regional spiral. And make no mistake, the spiral was there waiting. One dead American on the rope.
One missile from shore.
One civilian tanker taking a stray hit. One pilot forced to choose between a murky contact and a fatal delay. Any of those would have changed the story from enforcement to escalation. That is why this incident will matter long after the deck is cleared and the headlines move on. It showed how thin the line is between maritime control and open war in the most dangerous choke point on the planet. By dawn, the seized vessel was no longer a symbol of defiance cutting for open water. It was a captured hull under guard, its run finished, its message reversed. The blockade had been challenged and, for that day at least, held. Merchant captains heard it. Insurance desks heard it. Naval staffs in Tehran, Doha, Washington, and beyond heard it too. In Hormuz, credibility is measured in minutes, angles, and nerve, and on this night the side that owned all three kept the strait from tipping over the edge. Because in a waterway that narrow, 7 minutes is not a delay. It is the difference between an interception and a war.